Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 120. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. This week, yes, we're jumping on the bandwagon, the Minnesota Timberwolves bandwagon. What a run so far through the postseason for the Wolves, and former Golden Gopher star Jim Petersen joins me this week. Jim Pete, of course, does the games on television for the Wolves all season long, and is now doing commentary on the radio broadcast with Alan Horton as the playoffs roll on. Jim played for the Golden Gophers from 1980 through 1984. He was a member of the 1982 University of Minnesota Big Ten title team. Jim Petersen will join us for episode 120 this week. Our Go Gopher podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. You can get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Hey, make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union is also a major sponsor of our Go Gopher podcast. Life math is complicated, and Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union makes it easier with local financial experts available to help in person or virtually. You should go to affinityplus.org/Go Gophers for info. They have an award-winning mobile app, so check that out as well. affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. We're podcasting episode 120 from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any point. You can go back and listen to previous Go Gopher podcasts as well. Last episode, for example, we had a tremendous visit with Gopher star softball shortstop Jess Oakland, and she got the good vibes from making that appearance, as this week she was named Big Ten Softball Player of the Year. Our congrats to her on that distinguished honor, and you can still go back and listen to the episode from last week. Lots of great stories and lots of great content in there. This week, we're talking basketball. Minnesota Timberwolves basketball with former Gopher Jim Petersen, who will join me next.
I'm Clay Geary, walk-on turned scholarship wide receiver for Gopher football.
And I'm Ben Utek, U of M alumni, Super Bowl champion, and Tony Dungy Uncommon Award winner.
We understand championship culture, which is why we're part of the True North family of companies.
True North invests in only elite teams, like the champion team at Sunbelt Business Advisors, Minnesota's largest seller of companies. To learn more about True North and our diverse family of independently owned companies, visit TrueNorthEquityPartners.com.
Bay to Bay Boat Club offers a limited number of season-long memberships in our private club and half-day or full-day pontoon boat rentals on Lake Minnetonka. Members have the opportunity to play on luxurious pontoon boats, as well as a variety of well-appointed deck boats, speedboats, and offshore boats. Our daily pontoon boats are deluxe, custom-built boats with many amenities and comfortable seating for up to 14 people. Bay to Bay Boat Club, Country Club Boating, 24 years in business, and voted Minnesota's best 3 years in a row. Please visit us at baytobayboatclub.com for more information. We look forward to welcoming you this summer.
It's episode number 120, the Go Gopher podcast. It is our pleasure to welcome the great Jim Petersen, former Gopher star player, the pride of St. Louis Park, Minnesota, former Mr. Basketball Minnesota, I think maybe the first Mr. Basketball Minnesota ever. Jim Petersen with us, and he's having a great time following these Minnesota Timberwolves. The host city is on fire here with Wolves fever. Jim, thanks for joining us here on the Go Gopher podcast.
Mike, good talking to you, buddy.
Well, how much fun is this, man? I mean, what a run so far, 6-0 in the playoffs. Obviously, still work to be done, but this has been quite an opening number here for this group of Timberwolves.
Well, I mean, this is my 26th year broadcasting, Mike, and, you know, when I first started broadcasting with Chad Hartman, I was the radio analyst, and I did that for 2 years, went 1 year with Sean Grandy on TV. They went back to radio for 2 more years. So I got 4 years of radio. So I know you're a radio guy, and, you know, that's kind of my first love, you know, kind of cutting my teeth with Chad Hartman. But when I first started, you know, it was 50-win seasons. It was Kevin Garnett. It was 1998, and they had been to the playoffs a couple times already. They lost to the Houston Rockets the first time with Steph Marbury, and then they lost to Seattle the year before I got there. And then, then it was a bunch of first-round bow-outs. But, that 2003-2004 season was, obviously the greatest season in Timberwolves history, which has not been littered with a lot of deep playoff runs. But this team coming into this season, I really felt like it was the best team in Timberwolves history. I felt like Chris Finch was the best coach the Timberwolves have ever had. Tim Connolly is the best executive this team has ever had. And, Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, and Anthony Edwards is the best core we've ever had with all the players that have surrounded. So I felt like coming into this season, the team had a chance to make a deep run. Last year was more of a trial run, all the injuries that happened to Towns, and then late with Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels was, obviously derailed the ultimate success of that team and how far they could go. But they needed to go through that trial year in order to get to where they are now. And where they are now is, it's some of the most impressive basketball I've ever witnessed. Not just in Timberwolves history, I'm saying in basketball history. This last game in Denver, Ellen Horton and I were sitting there courtside, and we basically were at a loss for words. We weren't even sure what we were even seeing. The level of defensive dominance that Minnesota showed against a great offensive team like the Denver Nuggets was, I think, had everybody just kind of going, like, the entire league was pearl clutching. They're like, oh my God, what are we seeing? And it was just, Mike, it was just one of the great things in my basketball life to sit there and watch that team dominate the way they did.
No question. So I was on Monday night. I was at the Twins game. It started at 6:40. They cooperated and got that baby done. It was a 2-hour and 9-minute game. I was there with some buddies, and then
how about that?
Yeah, and so we got done, and then went to a sports bar. And Jim, I'll tell you, it was amazing. The sports bar was jammed. This was 9:20 on a Monday night in Minneapolis, and the sports bar was jammed. And that stretch in the second quarter when it was 3 after 3 getting made, and then defense, like 3 block shots, it seemed like every possession. I've never been in a sports bar quite like that. It was incredible, the energy even there. So even you and Alan sitting with the perfect seat was understandable. But even from afar, thousands of miles away in Minneapolis, it was pretty amazing. And I'm sure you've been able now to capture some of that feeling, that vibe that this town is kind of enveloped here with the Timberwolves. But I got to tell you, it was pretty fun watching it with a group of people, everyone with their Timberwolves jerseys and a bunch of stuff on, and it didn't matter that it was a late start because people were sure enjoying themselves.
The thing that one of the biggest changes between 2003, 2004, and now is the level of sports apparel and the way that you can represent your team. The kind of God, people didn't wear basketball jerseys back then very much,
Yeah.
But when you come to a game now, whether you're a Denver fan in Denver or a Minnesota fan in Minnesota, people come with there's so much gear, but between jackets and polos and shirts that the way that they merchandise all this stuff, you can represent your team pretty fairly, and you don't have to wear a jersey necessarily, but it's become really popular. And so when we go to these opposing gyms, when me and Michael Grady are working during the NBA season and, just in Denver here, there were so many Timberwolves jerseys in the stands, Mike. It was crazy. And at the end of the game in the fourth quarter, when the Wolves were just humiliated in Denver Nuggets and Anthony Edwards was at the free throw line, it seemed like it was a home game for Minnesota almost with the number of people that were chanting MVP. It was one of the most surreal things to be sitting there and to listen to Anthony Edwards get MVP chants to the level that they did. It was pretty unbelievable. And then Wolves in four. It's like, it was surreal. And so not only was the play on the court surreal, the number of Minnesota fans that traveled to that game. Because that's one thing I think, you've covered Gopher sports enough. Some of these sports fan bases travel better than others. And you know that when you go to a game that's including the Iowa Hawkeyes in whatever sport, they're going to have a pretty fair representation. They're going to travel pretty well, right?
No doubt.
And so these Timberwolves fans, man, they're traveling now. And that's one of the things that used to piss me off all the time. When we'd be at Target Center and the Celtics and the Lakers and the Toronto Raptors, because Canada's right above us and they're Canada's team, we'd be playing home games, and there'd be all these Faker fans and all these Celtic fans up in the stands, and like it's Minnesotans who are front runners.
Yeah.
So hey, wearing Timberwolves gear hasn't always been cool, Mike, but it is now.
It is. No question. You're right. I even over the years, occasionally, you have this, I'm sure, too, where someone will say, hey, any chance you can get me tickets to this or that? And it's part of the deal. No big deal. If I can help, I will. And over the years, if people have wanted Timberwolves stuff, and occasionally Gopher stuff, it'll be, if the Gophers are playing somebody, hey, my son went to Wisconsin, you got tickets? And I'd be like, no, I don't. Not for you. But with the Wolves, sometimes people say, hey, do you got any, you got any connections for tickets? And I'd be like, sure, what do you need? And he goes, my son's a big Steph Curry fan, or we want to watch Kobe Bryant. And I understand it. They're the greatest players in the world. But now, when I get asked, people are like, we want to go watch this team. And I think that's got to be, one of the cool things about watching this kind of evolve, especially as you mentioned, the years you've put into this thing. And there have been some fun times, no doubt. And I think we're kind of kindred spirits at times because there's been times where the Gopher basketball and football team haven't always been at the top of the standings either. So you go through some of these, leaner times, so to speak, and then it makes these good times all that much better, right?
Well, there's no doubt. And the season ticket members that have been with the Wolves from the beginning or even over the last 10, 15 years, they know who they are. It's not always been easy to be a Timberwolves fan, for sure. And so you're just so grateful for those people that help run your business through thick and thin. And, you become partners with these people. And, we've seen them, I've seen them over the years. And, I've just been getting a lot of really nice text messages and phone calls from friends and colleagues around the NBA that are so happy for me that, because I've had to sit here and suffer through a lot of bad basketball and a lot of tough times. And, the thing about for me, though, Mike, and this because, you're a broadcaster and, when your team's not playing great, and not having a lot of success, you as a broadcaster and me as a TV analyst, I can still win. I can win by being prepared for the game. I can win by not mailing it in. I can win by trying to still have fun and be entertaining with what we do. And, so that is ultimately, I think you can really identify with that as a broadcaster. You can have a poor team you're covering and you could still win.
No doubt, and some of it we joke on occasion with our Gopher broadcast team. Sometimes it's just about the fellowship. You win personally because you get to hang out with Daryl Thompson or Justin Guard or Al Nolan.
Right.
I mean, any night with Daryl Thompson is a win, right? That you get to hang out with our guy DT. So you're right. There are things you grasp. I got thinking about sometimes you said you're getting messages from other broadcasters that has happened on occasion to me as well. And then I got thinking about Dave Ennett, the longtime Northwestern broadcaster, back when they made the NCAA. And I remember texting him, and chatting with him. Congratulations when they made that NCAA tournament. Now they made a couple here in the last few years, and they've been good. And I know you follow that program, but the reason I bring it up is that there's some similar things there. When you've gone through some of these thinner times, it makes it better. And I'm trying to remember, was Sanjay on that team in 2017 that ended up breaking that long string?
Yeah, my son Sanjay was on. He was the captain of that team.
That's
actually.
What I was thinking. Yeah.
That was his fifth year. He had broken his wrist his freshman year and redshirted. So, That was his 5th year, and he'd gone through the program had gone through a lot of pain because they had never made the NCAA tournament.
Right, never.
They had never been to it was one of the only Power 5 conference teams that had never made it to the NCAA tournament at that time. So, I mean, that's a really memorable team. I still, Doug Collins is going into the Hall of Fame this summer. And, his son, Chris Collins, is the head coach of that Northwestern team. And when Chris first started, that was Sanjay's, redshirt freshman year.
Right.
And Sanjay didn't transfer. He ended up staying because he really resonated with Chris Collins. And so Doug Collins and I would connect because I've known Doug for years. I knew Doug when I was a player in the NBA. He would broadcast games for CBS and for Turner. And I've just known Doug over the years. But when Sanjay went there and played so well, Doug was so grateful to Sanjay and his commitment to the program and how he played that I still talk to Doug to this day. And that connection to that program is great. So, I mean, that was a great memory, man. That was a lot of bad basketball at Northwestern, too. They had a lot of good players, but not a lot of success. And so, yeah, it was great to be a part of that whole run.
Yeah, for sure. And Sanjay now, as long as we're on him, I wanted to ask you about him. He is, he's climbing the ladder pretty quickly. He's like right in the thick of it, right? He's on a coaching staff with, is it the Atlanta Hawks?
Yeah, well, that's, talk about Chris Collins. Chris Collins came to Northwestern from Duke. And, and obviously Coach K has kicked out a lot of great players and coaches, but one of them is Quinn Snyder. So when Sanjay decided to get into coaching, Doug Collins was on his resume. And so he asked Chris Collins and Doug Collins to be, if he could put him on his resume when he was like interviewing with the Utah Jazz. And that's Quinn Snyder.
Right.
And so Quinn Snyder, obviously another Duke guy. Quinn called Doug, and Doug gave Sanjay like the highest recommendation. And Quinn was like, well, that's enough for me, coach, because Doug actually gave Quinn his first coaching job in the NBA. And so now Sanjay's in Atlanta, but, the 3 years he spent in Utah were great. He and Quinn got to be really close. And now, Grant Hill is one of the minority owners with Atlanta. Mike Bray is on that staff. Quinn Snyder's the head coach. And Sanjay's kind of mobbed up with that Duke Mafia, Mike. He's kind of gotten mixed up in that whole Duke thing. So now, he's kind of a made man with those guys,
Yeah. Well,
and it's kind of fun.
No question. That's fun, and I'm sure when the Hawks and Wolves play, that's a thrill for you to be able to do those games and spend time with him and see him as part 100%. Of that. Yeah. All right. So what is working? Obviously, Tim Conley put this team together. He made that trade that there were times last year that people thought that might be the worst trade in the history of NBA basketball. Well, no one is saying that now. What is working? Why is this team so good, particularly defensively now, Jim?
You want to know what? You know what it is, Mike? The reason why this team is good is because they're finally listening to Coach Finch. All the things that Finch has been preaching to them, and he's been trying to get them to do, the hive mind of that coaching staff. That coaching staff is one of the finest group of people, and the diversity of talents that they have and all the things that they bring to bear from the offensive and defensive sides of the basketball. Elston Turner, the kind of player that he was in the NBA, and then he's been a coach in the NBA for over 25 years in this league. So, I mean, defensively, the concepts that he brings to that side of the ball, Pablo Prigioni and all of his experience being from Argentina. He's a head coach for the Argentinian national team. Mike Inori, all of his experience of being around the NBA and so long with the Toronto Raptors as the, basically associate head coach. And then all of the staff members underneath, adding Corliss Williamson this year, having Kevin Hansen on the staff, all of the player development guys and what they bring to bear. When you talk about the success of a team, there's so much that goes into it. And I think the level of trust that these players have in the coaching staff and the concepts that they're bringing to to the team night in and night out, from a scouting report standpoint, from an everyday at practice standpoint. They have a lot of trust in what they're being taught and what they're being told. And so Finch is, like I mentioned before, the best coach in Timberwolves history. And his style of play and his point of view is, modern. It's eclectic. It's ever-changing. And he's not too big to take input from other coaches. And he lets them coach. It's one of the great things when you sit there at practice and shoot around. Finch doesn't do that much, from start to finish in practice, but he's being heard throughout it. He's still the one that's in control and orchestrating,
Right.
but it's not just his voice that's doing it. It's like he's so smart and he's so good, and his ability to really clearly teach concepts. And then his relationship with the players, it's a lot like Greg Popovich. You think about Pop's run at San Antonio. I really think Finch will have that kind of run here in Minnesota. I think Chris Finch will be the coach of the Timberwolves for the next 20 years. And I say that because he's not going to be the reason why you lose. It's going to be because of personnel. He's not, so that's number one. Number two is I think there were a couple of things that happened this year that were seminal moments. I mean, obviously I was telling you about this is the best team in Timberwolves history, but the way that Anthony Edwards has come into his own has been phenomenal. I think that when Towns got hurt here at the end of the season, we went on that long road trip, and I think everybody remembers the block that Anthony Edwards had in Indiana.
Oh.
That block and winning that game that way, the way Ant performed in the offensive end, but the block in and of itself. On that road trip, it was a 6-game road trip towards the end of the season that started in Indiana. On that road trip, they went to Los Angeles. They lose to the Lakers, but they beat the Clippers. They were down 22 in that game, and they come back and win. And it was one of the more important wins of the season, and Ant was huge. And then also, some of the role players were too. And then to end that road trip, that was the road trip where Ant had that dunk on John Collins that everybody remembers. It's going to be the dunk that's going to play for the rest of his career. And so that road trip was huge. So Edwards' rise, the legend of Anthony Edwards growing this year has been huge. The combination of Gobert and Mike Conley. I mean, the Wolves have like three kind of separate, actually four. They have four different ecosystems that they can go to throughout the course of the game. They've got the Anthony Edwards one, which is number one, and then you got Karl Anthony Towns, who's A2, and then you got Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert. That whole thread of things you can do offensively and defensively with those two guys in pick and roll game and two-man game. And then you've got the bench. You've got Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I mean, what they bring to the table as well. So I don't know, man. It's just it's a lot of stuff. And but the anchor of it all is the defense. So you mentioned that trade. Rudy Gobert brings that whole culture of defense being super important to a team. And his greatness has trickled down. And then the Wolves also are blessed to have all these great perimeter defenders who, Rudy's never played with guys like that, Mike. He's never played with guys that are like that brilliant defensively on the perimeter. Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Anthony Edwards, Mike Conley is very good. Kyle Anderson is excellent. And now Towns and Naz Reid have become A defenders. Who would have thought Karl Anthony Towns would become like the A defender that kind of defends Kevin Durant in the first series, and now Nikola Jokic in this one.
And
so
doing
a lot
it well.
of narratives have been completely trashed.
Yeah. 100%. And that's you mentioned it. I thought it was an interesting quote from Chris Finch after the game the other night that of course Rudy Gobert couldn't play in because of the birth of his son. he said because they said, are you surprised you played that good defense without him? And I think the answer was something, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, no, because what he's done has impacted. We still won that game defensively because of Rudy Gobert, even though he wasn't playing, which I think was what you were kind of mentioning, that it brought a whole culture of defense to the roster.
Defense is sexy, Mike. I mean, it's like, it's sexy now. It's like, you don't, and this is why, like, when you're analyzing the game, I think it's easy to point to, exciting offensive plays, slam dunks, rim attacks, big time 3-point shots. Offense is easy and sexy to go to. When you're breaking down defense, it's not as sexy, but I mean, some of those stops that Nikhil and Jaden got, the way that they were hounding Jamal Murray, I mean, those are some, like, that's what people were buzzing about the next day. It wasn't Anthony Edwards' offensive, explosion or Karl Anthony Towns' 27 points. It was the gang defense, the attacking defense that everybody was talking about. And I just think that that's what people are going to remember, and that's what people are most frightened about when they think about the Minnesota Timberwolves right now.
Yeah, it was so fun to watch those guys just shut down Murray, and there were times where, many think that, Jokic is the best player in the game. He's probably going to win the MVP, but there were times he looked confused and frustrated, and that is a rarity. So the more the Wolves can do that, certainly the better their chances are to finish this thing off here in the next little bit. You mentioned when you analyze the game, and it's fun for you. I assume that you're able to kind of keep going here. You, of course, you mentioned you started in radio, but everyone knows you now as the very fine TV analyst with and it's been awesome to watch. But because of TV contracts, national and those things, Michael Grady doesn't get to necessarily work, but you're able to. Tell me how much fun you're having now, getting back to your roots in radio and having a chance to stay with this thing. Radio's so great. You got to paint pictures with your what we're seeing and with your vocabulary, and you got to be able to communicate the game. So that's one of the things when I first started broadcasting, just talking with Hubie Brown. Hubie said, anyone can talk, but can you communicate? And that really stuck with me, and then I just really learned a lot from Chad Hartman. He taught me some of the fundamentals of the game. Like, one of the things I think about, it's different than television, is that in radio, and this because, I'm sure you taught Al Nolan a few things, and you've worked with some pretty good analysts. Spencer Tollickson, was excellent too with the Gophers. But one of the things that Chad and I would talk about is Chad was like, okay, here's kind of the rhythm. You can talk from the time the ball goes through the net until it gets to half court, and then you got to throw it back to me. Right. And
I'm like, that makes sense. And so that's kind of my rule of thumb. Like, that's my fundamental. If I was to talk to Al Nolan, I'd be like, Al, you can talk from the shot of the rebound, going through the net, or when the possession changes until it gets to half court, and you got to throw it back to Mike.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing with Horton right now. And Alan is so great. He's just such a mechanic and a pro. I've done this before with him where I've just joined him. Like, we've been on the road or at home, and it's a TNT game, so we aren't working.
Sure.
And I would just go. He'd ask me to come sit with him. And hey, do you want to come do the game with me? You're not working tonight. I was like, sure. Because it's fun, right? It's fun doing it. And so I just, we always talk, if we go on a deep playoff run, that I would join him. And so the Wolves made it possible for me to do it. Alan wants me to join him. And I just am having a blast still being connected because, if I weren't working with Horton, I'd be sitting at home or I'd be in the stands. And then you're really not part of the game anymore, Mike. You know what it's like to be a part of it and then not part of it. It's different.
It is. Yeah, being a part of it is better than not. You're right. And how good is Alan Horton? Holy cow! I've really enjoyed listening to him over the years, and I'm happy that he's able now to be able to call this string of basketball, and then that now in this setting here the rest of the way, and hopefully it's all the way into July. He gets to have you by his side too. That's a heck of a tandem right there.
Well, I appreciate it. Alan. Yeah, it's fun. I'm just a big fan of Alan Horton, and he doesn't get the amount of attention that he should. obviously, the TV broadcasters get all the attention, but I mean, I got a lot of love for radio broadcasters, man, like yourself. You do a great job. Daryl Thompson is one of my best friends.
Right, yeah.
And, just the kind of camaraderie you have doing the radio gig, it's just you don't get enough credit, Mike, and you're really good at what you do too. Like, you guys do a great job, and you mix sports, and it's just, I got a lot of love for radio guys, man, a lot of love.
Well, I've got a lot of love for you. I've got a lot of love for the Timberwolves right now, for sure. This has been fun, and I know you're getting ready to go watch them practice and get ready for the radio broadcast on Friday night with Alan Horton. Jim, it is always fun to chat, to get your perspective. I'm thrilled that you guys are having this run, and let's have you back on sometime, and we'll go down memory lane, and we'll talk about some of your Gopher days and Mr. Basketball, and talk about playing against Michael Jordan and all of that stuff over the years.
Love it. And yeah. And you know what, who I talk to all the time and text with is Michael Thompson. And Michael, right, was my hero growing up, he and McHale, but Michael even more so, number 43. I wore number 43 in the NBA because of Michael Thompson. But yeah, I mean, the Gopher roots for me are what helped me get to the NBA. Watching those great Gopher teams, Bill Musselman in the early 70s, Clyde Turner, Jim Brewer, and all that. So yeah, I got a lot of great memories from Gopher life, and look forward to talking with you again, Mike. Thank you.
All right, very good, Jim Petersen. Thank you so much. It's episode 120. My thanks to the great Jim Petersen for joining me on this week's Go Gopher Podcast. They don't come any better than Jim Pete. It should be a fun postseason run the rest of the way for the Wolves and Jim, and fingers crossed they're playing for an NBA title. Episode 120 is presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com. We're also partnered with Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, a locally member-owned full-service financial invested in you. You can learn more at affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. That's affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and please click the subscribe button to the Go Gopher Podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen at any time. You can go back and listen to past podcasts, and please share the link to the podcast with others so they can subscribe and listen as well. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, please offer some positive feedback in the comments section. We'll talk again next week.